Hi, Josh.
Hey, Bob.
How you doing?
I'm pretty tired. How are you doing?
I can't complain. I'm actually not so tired as I usually am. But let me introduce us. I'm Robert Wright. This is The Wright Show, available on both streaming video and via audio podcast. You're Josh Summers, well known to our regular viewers and listeners. We've spoken before. You're like a yoga guy, yin yoga guru guy. You're seated like we should tell our podcast listeners. You are seated as a guru would be seated on the floor.
This is, well, given the back and forth we had as set up for this installment of the Dharma of Bob, I thought I might need to occupy a little bit more guru territory today.
It's a job somebody's got to do. And then maybe you're going to explain to me how to do it, as I understand, if we have time for that. So you're going to, today, we've had a series of conversations loosely grouped under the rubric, the Dharma of Bob, a term you came up with, I always point out. Today, maybe the Dharma of Bob part won't pop up immediately. I would like to do a couple things. I want you to be, if we have time, I want you to be life coach in a couple of senses. First of all, help me with some meditation problems I'm having right now. My practice isn't in great shape. And then if we have time at the end, you can be life coach in this deeper sense that you alluded to in our pre-taping patter, where you said you had big plans for me, which is good. I want to hear about the big plans for me.
And that's why I'm tired, because the big plans kept me up all night.
You've been thinking it. Well, good. That's funny. One thing we have in common is we stay up at night worrying about my future. And you're the only other person I know who does that besides me.
It's not just your future. It's the future you're trying to avoid.
Oh, the apocalypse.
Yes.
The apocalypse aversion. Yeah.
Right. And so the listeners need to realize that the Dharma of Bob is situated in context with that initiative.
We are all about avoiding the apocalypse. And this is a thing I focus on in my newsletter, the Nonzero newsletter. But there's speaking of which, in between these two life coach segments, I want to talk about the connection between mindfulness and courage. I wrote about the courage part in the newsletter recently, and if I had time, I was going to say, it may sound surprising for me to jump from mindfulness, which sounds kind of soft and mushy, to recommending courage, which I was saying more of us need to show on social media, including me. But if I'd had more time, I would have said there's actually a connection. In theory, at least, you should be able to cultivate courage via mindfulness. So I want to talk about that in the middle if we have time.
And that would be the point that we flip the life coaching role.
Okay, so that's the hinge?
Because,
that's the pivot
part of the
point?
hinge. Yeah.
Okay, from pedestrian life coaching to profound and visionary life coaching.
We've got it set. Let's do it.
Okay.
So talk to me. So before we go into the meditation, just so that the audience doesn't take what I say too seriously here in terms of the guru thing, it's the way I'm going to talk to you about this is what I do with a lot of my peers and friends. We share and talk about our practice, and we sort of try to triage what we think is going on for each other, and it's sort of a peer-to-peer mentorship.
I mean, you have done, I guess, a little meditation teaching, kind of in an ancillary way. You're mainly a yoga teacher. But
actually, I've let you slide with that one, and I haven't interjected. I do teach meditation regularly. I have actually a lot of meditation teaching background. I've taught at Boston University in a sports psychology program for a while, and I was an acupuncturist before the middle of COVID, which shut that down. So I have 3 different hats. 3 of them are all quite related.
Okay.
So I have that in the mix.
Maybe at some point we'll get to the sports psychology part. I'm fascinated by.
Well, that's going to come into that's going to come up when we triage your practice right now. Yeah.
You're going to help my golf game?
Well, no, I'm going to help your game with the way. See, the sports psychology piece was a professor of sports psychology invited me into her positive psychology class to talk about mindfulness one time, and then she hatched this idea of me giving an intervention / training to the Boston women's soccer team. Boston University women's soccer team.
Ah.
So it was one of these things that she did a pre-post analysis on their psychological experience of stress, among other things, and I was the quote-unquote teacher, and I learned some things in that I might be able to
And you
apply.
transform them into a world-class team? Just say yes. It's trust me. I'm not good at marketing myself, but I have basic marketing instincts. Just say yes.
Well, it was mostly the colleagues' work, but she did it. But she did find that there was much better capacity that the players had to navigate their stress, get back into the zone, and it was really the first Division I study on mindfulness in
Really,
sport.
I didn't know this about your history.
There's a lot of things.
You're too modest. There's a lot of things I don't know. Probably some of them you don't want me to know, and then we can keep those.
No, yeah, those can come out too.
Well, that's good. I mean, we should do a whole conversation on sports psychology, because I'm a head case in any athletic endeavor. I am a head case. You can name the sport, I will be a head case. But we'll get back to that. Let's talk about my meditation problem. I blame it on the pandemic. So here's the pattern of my meditation practice had been, I'll go to a meditation retreat. It'll kind of recharge my practice, and that'll last for more than a year, and then I'll feel I need another retreat. So I was kind of going to retreats about every 2 years, like 1 week silent meditation retreat, sometimes 10 days. The longest ever was 2 weeks. And then I was due for one this summer, but then the pandemic, as you know, you've heard about this pandemic thing probably. It hit. And by the way, I looked at IMS's site today, and I still don't see any signs of live physical retreats on the calendar. So I don't know how long it'll be. But so as a result, I feel like my practice, I still do it, and I think I deserve some credit for that. I get up in the morning, I do for reasons I probably shouldn't get into, I've been setting the timer for 34 minutes. Odd number, I know.
And you don't want to explain the odd number.
You don't. Well, I'll tell you honestly, when your practice isn't going that great, so it's not like you're exactly looking forward to it. You know what I mean?
It sounds like lumpy oatmeal.
Yeah, it's kind of like, oh, can I do 40 minutes of this? Well, I should do more than 30. Well, 34 seems like closer to 30 than it is to 40. It seems like I can do that. So that's how I got into 34. Am I starting to sound like a problematic case?
It's starting to come into focus.
Yeah.
Carry it.
I don't know how to describe it. It's like at one end of the spectrum, like when you're, right after you've done a retreat, or in day 5 of a retreat or something, you just sit down, you focus on the breath, certainly within like a minute or so, you can easily focus and immerse yourself in kind of 10 consecutive breaths, no sweat, you keep going. And then, 6 months after the retreat, may take you 5 minutes, what was taking you a minute. And now, more than 2 years after my last retreat, I mean, I don't want to make it sound like just a linear decline, okay? You have your ups and downs. But at the moment, it just seems like I'm lucky to be able to focus on 10 consecutive breaths by the end of the session. It's like, and I think part of it is I've kind of given up. I sit down and it's like, in a way, maybe what I've done is get into a version of Zen. You hear that some Zen instructions are like, just sit down and do nothing. They don't say focus on your breath, blah, blah, blah. Just be, just sit. Like, well, okay, I sit, my mind wanders, and it's like, fine, this is okay. Okay, I'll do that. And then it does, it's like slowly you get a little of that out of your system and you get a little calmer and better able to focus. But it may be as simple as just like telling myself, no, sit down and focus on your damn breath right away. But I don't think it's going to be that simple.
No, well, that wouldn't be my recommendation.
No, of course not, because you're one of these meditation people who's like, Be gentle with yourself.
No, gentle. Well, okay, that will feed into the courage piece later.
Okay,
because that tiptoes into the dynamic of compassion versus what the Tibetans compare to idiot compassion.
Compassion.
Idiot compassion is just indulging the whinging, desiring, whatever.
Being too easy on yourself is idiot
right. Just
compassion.
If you're sleepy in meditation, go back to sleep. If you're not feeling good, just move and maybe get up and have a coffee or something. You don't. It's not the right time to do it. Come back when it feels right for you. That's indulgent.
That.
Yeah, yes, I'm against that. So. Yeah, real compassion is investigating and opening to the pain of experience and wishing that to be mitigated, to relieve the suffering.
Well, but you shouldn't really quite be sitting there wishing for it to be mitigated and go away, right?
Sure, that can be part of the intention.
Well, it can be part of the intention going in, but when you're sitting there, you shouldn't be trying to push it away.
Not push it away, right. Not push it away, but to open to it, and then that is what awakens the compassion. It's in the encounter with the difficulty that you brush up against or encounter the pain, which then animates the aspiration in the heart to have it be relieved. But in a deep level, which is the letting go. I mean, I know you know this, but the letting go of the desire that it goes away is the pivot.
Yeah.
Within that process. So let's back up, because it started out you're talking about you go on these retreats once every couple of years, and they recharge your practice, and you come off, and then you're able to sit down and lock in on the breath, and you get in that groove pretty quickly, and you're able to focus. Mm-hmm. So I think that's an incredibly common experience. I know that experience myself well. And what I hear, and I'm checking with you to see if you recognize this, but there's a subtle clinging to that focus that you develop on retreat.
Probably.
And then, I mean, I know many of my friends are like this, that they feel like they just sort of need to get back on retreat to reamp and keep that level of samadhi or concentration going. And then if they lose that, if that gets degraded, then somehow the practice is in the ditch, which is essentially, I think, what you're describing.
Probably.
Okay. So I would, one thing you could do is just step back and let's discuss what the frame of the practice is about. Okay. So in your words, how would you describe what you're trying to, quote unquote, what kind of process or development are you engaged with in the meditation?
Do you mean what are the overarching goals, or?
Yes, that's one way of putting it.
Well,
what's the outcome that gets to? I mean, meditation in Buddhism is referred to as bhavana. It's a development. It's a cultivation. Mm-hmm. So, what is getting cultivated?
Well, I mean, broadly speaking, you could say mindfulness. That's the tradition of meditation. It's not the only Buddhist tradition of meditation, but it's the kind that I'm kind of in. And also, I mean, it's like.
So let me push that further. Though, what is the function of mindfulness? To what end is what?
It's funny. I mean, people have asked me. There's some very practical things, like what's the virtue of mindfulness practice? And sometimes I just say you do fewer regrettable things. Right. I mean, you're and that's because you're in a more balanced, equanimous state. Less likely to fly off the handle, less likely to send the ill-advised email, the ill-advised retweet.
So there's wisdom. There's wisdom. I think in a previous conversation, you succinctly define wisdom as, at one level, just avoiding bad outcomes, right?
Yeah, Obama described his foreign policy aspiration as don't do stupid shit. It's better than doing it. And it's a start. Yeah. It's not, it's not all the way to enlightenment or nirvana, which are kind of the same, or arrive at the same time. But it's that's it's a Certainly, yeah. Wisdom is it's being in the kind of emotional and mental state that facilitates wise action. I would say that's, and I mean, to get back, to stay on a pragmatic note, and efficient action. Like, I mean, wasting time is also not the wisest thing you can do in the world.
Right. You hear the phrase skillful action, skillful means.
Yeah, skillful means is a common one in Buddhism, and it refers to, the sense is kind of, you're kind of sizing the situation up and doing the wise thing given what you want to achieve. I mean, it allows you to live a skillful life. There's a lot of ways you could describe mindfulness. But I think at a practical level, it facilitates effective and wise intervention in the world. And as a byproduct, you would expect it to increase your well-being, and it tends to, I think, increase your appreciation of,
Okay. But let's come back to the your experience in the practice around your breath,
right?
Because it sounds like there's a dichotomy or a binary between good practice and bad practice in your mind. And good practice, based on what you're saying, would be predicated on being able to sustain your attention on your breath for more than 10 cycles.
It has tended to involve that in my experience. When my practice is when I would call my practice like going well, I would have that capacity, yes.
Right. So that happens when the conditions support it on retreat. And I think retreat experience gives everyone that does it a really good felt experience of that development. Mm-hmm. But in daily life, to kind of hang on, try to cling to the momentum that we have on retreat is a recipe for dissatisfaction.
Well, let me add.
Let me just go back to the breath though. If the practice is about developing the capacity for skillful action, skillful perception, wisdom, compassion, those things, then what I would want to talk with you about is how does the dynamic of the meditation facilitate that development? And to quote the Thai teacher of the last century, Ajahn Chah, who said, a hen can stay on her nest immobile for hours and hours and hours, watching over her eggs. That doesn't make her wise. So, and the analogy is just keeping your attention stuck on the breath mm-hmm. is not necessarily going to produce a deeper level of understanding. As I know, I've heard you talk about understanding the structure of experience, or the structure of the self, or the structure of emotion and feeling and all that. So I would want to look into the dynamic between when you're on the breath, when you get off the breath, what you're aware of, and how you treat waking up to not being present on the breath. Because it's in that territory, I think, that the real important insights and broader perspectives start to come vis-a-vis the reference point of the breath, not keeping the attention on the breath.
But there's two different issues here. One is like, okay, let's say you're in the groove and you're focusing on your breath well. You realize that's not the end, goal. That's not, that's not the point. I mean, unless you're really, pursuing samadhi and doing kind of concentration meditation, and that's a different thing. But if you're doing mindfulness meditation, the point of the focus is to kind of, some would say, stabilize the mind, whatever. But that's as a way station to something else. Okay, that's one point, fine. And if Ajahn Chah said that in this context, fine. But that's different from saying, I'm not even getting to the point where I'm focusing on the breath, right? These are two, can something useful happen without going through that way station? And let me add, something does. I mean, one thing that keeps me going is that it's not a complete waste of time. I mean, I sometimes say that, look, at a minimum, it's better than average mind wandering, by which I mean, if you sit there long enough, just with your eyes closed, and and there's mind wandering without outside intervention. In other words, it's not like your mind wanders and then you see a tweet. Your mind wanders and you see CNN. Your mind no, it's like sealed off mind wandering. And in my experience, as the time passes, 5-10 minutes or so, you are calming down a little. You are, something is changing, and like, for example, good ideas are more likely to pop into my mind. I may not be thinking about them, but it'll just be an idea that's relevant to my work. And also then the time will often arrive where, you can focus on your breaths if you want now. And that's not necessarily critical as something to do at that stage, but it's a sign that you have, you have kind of, your mind is calming down a little, stabilizing. So,
well, right. So in my own practice life, and this is where I think not so much we started practice more or less around the same time, give or take a few years. But I think, I probably worked with more teachers offering different approaches.
Yeah.
And so my approach in general is analogous to the way I think a jazz musician develops themselves, which is you survey a whole bunch of influences. You really steep yourself in the ones you resonate with, and then you integrate them, and then you ultimately figure out how to make them come alive in your own experience. Mm-hmm. So, I've done a practice where for a long time it was just to be receptive to whatever the hell happened, to the mind wandering or not, to let that go on. And I found that, and this is actually what I recommend for beginners, because there's it's too easy for a person in meditation to really create a divided mind. That there's some experience to have, some experiences not to have. And I think if you have the frame around the practice the way that I read the Buddha's instructions, the practice is to be aware and interested and explorative of all experiences. And that includes the mind wandering. And the question then is, how do you get to know what's going on in the mind wandering? That's through reflection. And I don't have any problem. I think there's been an emphasis in contemporary mindfulness. Hang on, there's been a contemporary emphasis in mindfulness to get into the present moment, like locked into the present moment. That's the only sort of lane of experience that will produce any kind of wisdom or value. And that to me is just too reductive.
Right, but when you're doing the mind wandering, you're not observing it.
You're not observing it, but that doesn't mean that something like uninteresting isn't occurring within it, or that there's something.
No, like I said, it's better than average mind wandering, but it's and I accept that, and that's fine. But there's
well, hang on. So you're familiar with the list of the hindrances, right? The difficult mind states.
There are various lists, but some shorter than others. But yeah,
the five big ones, the nivaranas. Desiring mind, ill will, the mind of ill will, the anxiety, restless, worry mind, the low energy mind, and the doubting mind. And I mean, there's a kind of presumption that in mindfulness practice, you're meant to sort of catch and release these whenever they arise. If you catch your mind desiring, you recognize it, you kind of become aware of it, and then let it go and come back to your breath. But the wandering mind itself is going to be some permutation or combination of the spectrum of those energies. And to understand them, you have to let them go on a bit. And then, reflect back either during the meditation or even after the meditation, get a sense of what your mind is preoccupied with. And that's I think pretty accurately described in the Satipatthana Sutta, the Sutta on the Four Foundations of Mindfulness, when the Buddha refers to looking at the hindrances when they're present, when they're absent, getting a sense of how are they released when they arise, what kinds of fuel, how do they come to be in your mind. That requires a comprehensive understanding that if you were limited to strictly present moment attention, would not be possible.
Well, no, but I mean, another way of putting the problem is that, like, observing the things you're saying should be observed that you just listed is easier in some states of mind than others. And I'm saying that when my practice isn't going well, it's taking me a long time to get into the kind of state of mind where you can observe these kinds of things. So by your own definition, things aren't going great.
Well, no. So let's come back to something more fundamental. Just basically, we're describing being present and drifting off. Right? There's moments when you're awake and you're aware that you're doing what you're doing, and then there's moments where you've drifted off.
Yeah.
Right? So the question is, when you wake up to having drifted, really at that moment, I think we've talked about this a little bit before, but to me, in my view, that is the pivot point and the most important point of the whole process. Mm-hmm. Not being on the breath, not being focused on the body, but how do you navigate that moment of being wakeful?
You mean when you go, oh, my mind is wandering?
Right. What do you do at that point?
Okay. What do you recommend?
Well, there's a variety of things you could recommend, but one is to appreciate it.
In the sense of be grateful, or in the sense of be aware?
Be great. I mean, celebrate it in a sense of reward yourself, like in a kind of way that the mind is awake again. And I'm borrowing this from a few other teachers that I've been exposed to, who really encourage, to smile gently. I mean, this is just one. I'm not recommending you do this necessarily, but you could smile in the mind, because that has a cascade of biochemical effects through the body, and it is conducive to tranquility. When you're receptive to that experience, you're basically praising your mind for doing what you are encouraging it to do, which is to be present. So if you wake up and you kind of reflexively slap your wrists, do the old Homer Simpson "don't," and then hustle back to the breath, it's like training a dog. If you negatively reinforce the dog when they do the behavior you want,
right,
they're not as likely to do.
Right. No, that's. I mean, I remember at my very first retreat, the teacher. I think I wrote about this in my book, but the teacher is like, it's the first time during the retreat where you meet in a group with a teacher. So for this one 45 minutes, the silence is going to be broken after like 3 days. And it was my first retreat, or it was probably the second day or first day. Since I was a beginner, they would have seen me early. And I was like, so how's it going? And I'm like, I just keep like, realizing that I'm not focusing on my breath. She's like, that's great. You're realizing that you're not focusing on your breath. And I'm like, yeah, but it happens like all the time. She's like, that's even better. Like, that's what you're saying. I mean,
exactly. That in itself is an insight into anatta.
Into not self.
Yeah.
Elaborate on that. Elaborate on how that's an insight into not self.
Your conscious attention, your conscious sense of self tries to do a simple task, and you get disabused of your ability to do that task again and again and again. You're not in charge of your mind the way you think you are. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yes. Although ironically, becoming more aware of that kind of, in a certain sense, put you in charge. But we'll leave all that aside.
Okay, so I had a session with my online group on Monday, and we were talking about the theme of doubt. And there was a kind of a connection that was made to an article in the New York Times by Adam Grant, I believe, on this kind of malaise that is sort of pervading the collective right now, that he referred to with the word languishing.
Oh, yeah. I saw that piece.
In between thriving and full-scale depression, there's this middling state, kind of energy of just not thriving, kind of the meh mind. Like things just aren't spicy or attractive. You don't feel engaged and enthusiastic as much as you would. But his antidote was flow. And this gets back to the sports psychology thing.
This is an idea most famously associated with Csikszentmihalyi is one pronunciation of that formidable last name.
Csikszentmihalyi.
Yeah.
So yes, and if so what I brought into the group on Monday was, how can you practice in a way that supports the experience of flow? You're I think in some level you're feeling like there is no flow, that you're kind of like grinding things out, and it's a little bit routinized and dull, and not very exciting. So what I offered to them, and the feedback from many was pretty good. A few had difficulties with it. So again, one size fits all practice. I don't believe in every instruction is going to work for everybody, but was at the moment of waking up to pause and just reflect on what you had been drifting into, if you can. And to see that within the drifting, there's some manifestation of one of the hindrances. Like there's a desire for something, you're planning, you're remembering, you're hashing out something you're going to write about. And then the follow-up question I had was, once you are able to sort of recognize what's going on, to inquire into what, and I can already sense your audience members will roll their eyes when they hear me say this, but to sense the energy, what the energy is in trying to achieve within that state. Like what is it, what's the kind of the root of it in terms of what is it seeking? What is that energy seeking?
What is what seeking?
The energy that you were, like the state of mind that you were in, that departed you from the perch of the breath or the feeling of your hands or your body. When your mind departs from that experience, there's an unconscious kind of train of that's seeking something.
Yeah, there always is. That's the whole problem.
No, but this is the problem to understand.
Mm-hmm.
So as soon as,
but I mean, you're always the problem of life at some level, according to Buddhism, is that you're always grasping for something.
Right. So in a sense, you're seeing the grasping mind, just sure. after it's left the gate.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's an important piece. And then, what I was trying to encourage was, once if you're able to sense what it's grasping or seeking, in a sense, to see the limitations of that strategy.
Of the thing of the grasping?
Yeah. Or or even just to feel into it and let it be heard. Because, and this is what I was trying to get at with the idea of compassion, is that when you see over and over again how the conditioned habit patterns, this, like what in Buddhism they're referred to as sankharas, or in yogic terminology samskara, when you see those habit patterns, and they break into consciousness from the unconscious when your mind wanders.
Mm-hmm.
And then something wakes you up, and then you are able to get some bearing on it. And at that point, you can, what I was recommending is to listen to it, get a sense of what it's seeking, and then just let it be heard. So there's no fighting with it. You're listening to the experience.
Okay.
And then you can return to your so then it resets. And the reason I'm saying this is because, and I'm going to try to build this metaphor into other territory in our conversation, is during the pandemic, one of the things I've been doing just as a hobby is trying to get back my music hobby back in gear. And I tried to be a musician at one point, but the main problem I had in the world of music was that I had a terrible musical ear. I had lots of other skills. I could read music.
That's a hindrance of another kind. Yes.
Right. But there are software and apps now that train the ear. And what's kind of confidence inspiring about working with these apps is that you can see yourself progress. That there's actually, they like the app I'm using will play a chord progression, a harmonic progression. At the end of it, they'll play a note, and you have to guess. That's the question. You have to guess what note it is in relationship to the context of the other sounds.
Right.
And I think there's an analogy here that in meditation, you're tuning your mind. That's what, in the Eightfold Path, the word sama, ditti, sama, speech, like the wise speech, wise action, all those things. The word sama, from one teacher I've had, describes it as being in tune. It's a quality of being in tune with your speech, being in tune with your mind. Being
it's
in tune
usually
with
translated as right conventionally, but some people have issues with that translation.
I think you have an implicit bias based on your own name around that, but
it is the predominant, right? I mean, that is the right speech, right? And then there's been a backlash against that, but over the decades, that has been the main translation, right?
I've seen wise and right used interchangeably, but either one, that becomes this sort of like rigid form of dogma that you just have to comply to what's right and not. And I think being in tune is much more flexible, less rigid way of looking at it. But the point is, you're learning to become in tune with your experience so that you then have that skillfulness to play within the dynamics of your life. The more you're able to recognize the patterns clearly for what they are, whether it's not being with the breath or planning or remembering, and you're better able to recognize them off the cushion.
Right, sure.
And so there's like, basically I'm trying to figure out try to help you consider using all the phases of the meditation as valuable to the meditation. But there's no experience that, like, as one of the teachers we shared, Rodney Smith, would say, the only experience to have in meditation is the one you're having. Any other
Rodney would say that, and then he would follow that by chastising you for having the wrong experience. But I digress. I mean, I love Rodney. I've had him on the show. But yeah, go ahead. I mean, and by the way, we should say, I mean, all of this, one reason if I sound a little skeptical is like, Buddhism has evolved and assumed many forms, and there are many traditions and so on, and it's been taught in a billion ways. And I think your version is being refracted through a particular modern sensibility, that doesn't like admonition, but you know well that there are Buddhist traditions where the teacher like hits you on the head for falling asleep, right? And so it is, it's
but okay, so I have to push back on that charge of me being just a woo-woo, soft.
No, I didn't say you're woo.
Sweet.
I'm saying you're a particular person in a particular cultural milieu and doing a particular interpretation.
Right, but I've also I've practiced in systems I think that arguably are just as hard as the one you just described. And I've gone the hard route, and it is not. I don't think it's necessary. I just do not think it's necessary. But
I don't want anybody to hit me on the head. I'm not asking for that, definitely.
But the aim, I mean, I'm interested in people waking up to sort of their true nature. And that requires a certain fire. I'm not diluting it. I mean, the fire of it so much so it's like, as I think one author said, it's the gurgling babble of a California hot tub. But the point is, if you are interested in samadhi and developing the calm states and ability to see, like,
samadhi in a particular concentration, focus, kind of
stillness. That's another word that I think gets mistranslated, because this is sort of the heart of it. You keep talking about focused attention. That's a very narrow form of
but it is part of. I mean, as often translated, it is one of two primary, as commonly translated, it's, one of two primary kinds of meditation. It's, it's prominent. You're taking issue with one common translation of it, but it's not like, right.
Right, but if you put the term in context with other images of what the Buddha referred to as samadhi, right, the narrow focus point, I don't think is supported. He defined it as a collected, gathered, unified state, similar to what it's like when a warm spring comes up through a body of cold water. It diffuses through the whole thing, the whole body, so there's a pervasive sense of warmth.
Yeah. Well, here I'm going to be more contemporary and less traditional than you, I think, in the sense that all of this business about what the Buddha actually meant, it's like the tradition there's an array of texts that say an array of things in different traditions, and the idea that we can reconstruct exactly what how the Buddha would have translated each word and exactly what he meant is, I think, we don't have to get into the philosophy of this, but I think, Stephen Batchelor does this, and I've had conversations with him and kind of accuse him of trying to convince us that the Buddha would give the Stephen Batchelor interpretation the Buddha seal of approval, right? And it's like also just different things work for different people.
Sure.
I'm sure, you're not here to say us that like, say, Tibetans who emphasize a lot of visualization have it wrong, right?
Absolutely
the tradition went in that direction in a particular place at a particular time. Some people find it useful. It's very different from what we're talking about.
Right.
So I don't know. I mean, I just, I guess I would say, look, if stillness, we all agree stillness is a great thing. And it's certainly part of the aspiration in this tradition. Whether all the people who have translated samadhi in other terms are wrong is I don't see the point of arguing. But
but what you mean by stillness conditions how you relate to what goes on in your practice.
Well, right, but it doesn't matter whether I say that that's the translation of samadhi. I'm totally on board for stillness.
Okay, so the means by which we become still is different depending on if you're trying to focus on your breath and do it versus if you rest into what's going on and start to intuit. You're going to cut me off if I say this, but I think this is what the Buddha means by wise stillness. It's not a stillness absent of experience. It's a stillness within the field of experience, because that's what will give you insight into the nature of things. You can't tune everything out. So the stillness is radically inclusive of all conditions. Like sensations, feelings, thoughts, all of it arise and pass away within the experience of stillness.
The experience of stillness allows you to observe all these things and be aware of them.
Yes.
Right. No, I've been there. We're not arguing about that.
Right. No, but we're debating on how to proceed when the momentum of a particular kind of concentration degrades off retreat.
Well, I'm not even debating that. The only thing I'm debating is whether we should keep pausing to talk about what the Buddha actually meant. I just don't think we should. And what words, how words should be translated and so on. But
I'm happy to leave that. I can leave that aside.
Yeah. But I mean, I take it. So yeah, I mean, you've given me a couple of things to think about. I mean, one is to try to, when I do notice that my mind is wandering, which at the moment is happening all too infrequently in my view. But when I do notice that, kind of celebrate it, which I think makes sense. I'll even try the smile thing. As you know, it doesn't come naturally to me. I'm willing to give the occasional smile a try. And then the other thing, which maybe I'm a little fuzzy on, but it has to do with trying to, as long as you're noticing that your mind was wandering, observe certain things about the nature of the wandering, what was driving the wandering. And you want me to think of that in terms of the 5 hindrances. Is that right?
I would say use the 5 hindrances as a placeholder for the spectrum of things that propel you into thought. And it's not all negative. There might be things that you can think about that actually, whether it's related to your work or something that I think are fine to consider.
Yeah.
And even, I misspoke there. All of it is fine. All of it's fine.
Okay, good. Then we've succeeded. It's all fine. It's all good. It's funny. A different tendency I would have had is to think that, you can always, if you observe the mind wandering closely enough, you can always see it as being driven, by either, the greed, hatred, and delusion thing. You can translate the greed as more like this clinging attraction to, grasping, and you can translate the hatred more as aversion. I would say you can always view what's driving your mind wandering as one of those two things in a certain sense. There's something you're wanting. There's something driving the thought pattern, and it's either desiring, something, desiring to believe something, desiring to convince yourself of something, or it's being averse to some thought or to some way of thinking about things. And even those can be boiled down to tanha. I mean, you can subsume both of those under tanha. You're always either craving the thing or craving to be away from the thing, right?
Yes.
So that would have been my natural tendency. I'll have to wrap my mind around this 5 hindrance scheme of assessing your of observing the mind wandering.
It could. I mean, that was just a starting point. You could do exactly what you just described. Yeah. So you could wake up and just sort of, as you wake up to the wandering, and to be clear, I don't think you're going to be aware of the wandering while it's occurring most of the time.
Very hard. Yeah, I would say almost by definition, but maybe when I'm closer to enlightenment, I won't say that.
Right. No, and I think, and I'm not there either, but I think that does get held up as an ideal. Many teachers say there's no problems with thoughts, just be aware of thoughts while you're having your thoughts. And I think we've talked about this maybe a year or two back, but that, in my experience, I really got into watching. Is that possible? Is it possible to be aware of thoughts while they're occurring in real time? And every time I was sufficiently aware of thoughts occurring, that had an operational influence of interrupting the thoughts, and they've just vanished.
Right.
And certain teachers will say that's great. But if you're interested in getting to understand how thoughts function, how thoughts condition your view, I think it behooves us to let it go on for a while, and just as long as it does, really. And then when you realize it, you've woken up to it, then you can look back through it a little bit. But part of what I'm, if you picked up on the smiling bit or the celebrating bit, this is, there's a style of meditation by an American monk, Bhante Vimalarasi, who has a system that he attributes to having extracted from the suttas, the early teachings, and he calls it a 5-hour pattern. So when you wake up, you recognize that you've wandered, and you recognize what you're aware of. Mm-hmm. You re-smile, so you reestablish a soft smile. You relax your body. Am I getting these R's incorrect? Mm-hmm. And then you let it be. It's a form of releasing it. Just let it be. And then and only then, after you've gone through that step, you return. And his argument is that if you don't do those steps, you inevitably build in extra unnecessary tension. There's a struggle or fight with the wandering. And his point is you have to go around the cycle over and over and over again.
So wait, you recognize, you re-smile, you relax, and then you...
physically.
Yeah,
you relax physically.
Sounds
because
easy.
There's often, in thinking, there's a subtle tension that can creep into the physical experience.
Sure, and then you do what? You return to...
You return to whatever your primary object was. So if that was the breath, he actually recommends metta practice, not as like a
loving kindness,
not as loving kindness, not as a ongoing repetition of a phrase, but just as using one phrase, and then relaxing within the sort of the feeling of the chest or the heart until your mind wanders again. Then you repeat it. Okay. So there's a way. I mean. I know John Kabat-Zinn would say something like this. It's going around that cycle that is the equivalent of doing a repetition with a weight in your arm. Mm-hmm. Coming back to the Ajahn Chah thing. If you stay just on your breath, that is not going to give you the training conditions to really develop both the mindfulness of what it's like when your mind is not with the breath, to see how your mind moves. That's one way of describing mindfulness. You're seeing how your mind moves from one thing to another and the relationships within that process.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, well, the 4R thing is interesting too. I'm afraid I can't oblige him on the meta front, but that's interesting too. So you give me plenty to think about, and I already have in mind questions for next time we talk about this. Things I'd like to actually bring up now, but I think we should move on to this courage and mindfulness thing.
Yes,
because it's of genuine interest to me, and let me, I think you read the piece I'm going to reference in my newsletter, the Nonzero newsletter. The point was, it was an argument that, we should be willing to do things on social media, if that's where we are, that are unpopular in our tribe. We don't have to go over. What's that?
And risk the blowback. If you think your tribe is kind of, thinking tribally for any reason, not acknowledging something that's just not consistent, there's something that happened that really doesn't fit into the talking points of the tribe, and so nobody's kind of acknowledging it, the reality of it, or this could have been like, or back in olden days when Trump was president, everybody's seizing on something as evidence of his collusion with Russia when really it's not, and you're going overboard, and it's just not the smoking gun, and people are going crazy, and it allows people in the other tribe to rightly ridicule you and so on. It could be any number of things. It could be, you think the wokeness is going too far and distorting your tribe's vision, or if you're in another tribe, it could be something else. It doesn't matter. But the point was, on social media, it can take real courage to take a stand like that, because it's very painful for a bunch of people to jump in and condemn you, as will pretty reliably happen in situations like this. I mean, you can phrase things in a way that reduce the chances of that, maybe, but still, we can all probably think of things we're tempted to say that aren't going to be popular within our tribe, and we just don't. And it happens to me all the time, but I was singing the praises of the courage. And I was thinking, there has to be a way to use mindfulness to cultivate courage, because what keeps you from courage is fear. And fear of the blowback, and maybe fear of various feelings you'll have after the blowback. Well, and then, I was hoping you'd say more about this, but from the evolutionary psychological front, this must be rooted in social ostracization, right? Like that has to be a deeply rooted kind of atavistic fear. Sure.
And a desire to be thought highly of, within your peer group. But yeah, the ultimate opposite of that being actual ostracization. You don't want to be close to that end of the spectrum. You want to be close to the accepted and admired end of the spectrum. And so,
then you combine livelihood to that ostracization in the form of canceling.
It can have real career stakes. And again, that's like the extreme case can be cancellation, losing your job, but even the increments along the way are things you're naturally averse to. Just a few people thinking you're cancel worthy, or a few people thinking less of you than they thought before. Because in this environment, you can say reasonable things and be accused of almost anything, there's
a pile up, and then I don't know. I mean, I looked at the article you wrote. I mean, I've read it a few times now, and I was on your Substack page and saw was reading through some of the comments, and I was just impressed by the number of people that were chiming in and saying, "Well, I'm off social media now. I pulled the plug on that completely," and I've done more or less a similar thing, because it's just with the pileup, it's impossible to process that. There's no conversation. There's no discussion. It's just this a shooting range.
Right, and I respect that. And like right now, I don't have Twitter on my smartphone. That's a kind of a I just don't want to get too obsessed with it, so I just do it on the computer. And I respect the decision to just unplug. That said, it would be a shame if kind of all right-minded people unplugged. I mean, you would like to think there's somebody in there trying to set your tribe aright.
This will feed into the apocalypse aversion a little bit. I don't know if we'll get to it today, but unless there's enough people that actually en masse leave and actually start having better conversations and restore their own sanity.
Sure. And then maybe venture back for a while.
Into a different form.
And then they need a break but I mean, the problem is, and this is especially true during the pandemic, it's like, if you aren't going to influence people on social media, where are you going to do it? Right now, if we emerge from this pandemic, this seems to be happening, at least in America, there will be more actual in-person conversations and so on. But I still think, given the importance of social media, I think it would be good if there were, people who were really trying to be really mindful and do the right thing on social media and not gratuitously antagonize people and so on, and are willing to wade in. But in any event, I mean, the thought was just that, like, in principle, if fear is the main thing standing in the way, that in principle is something that mindfulness can help you with, right? I mean, any given kind of aversive feeling is something that in principle mindfulness can help you with. And yet, this seems like not that easy an application of mindfulness. You know what I mean? It's not as easy even as anxiety, which is not easy, but
I would rather overcome my fear of public speaking.
Right.
Than I would I would be harder to overcome my fear of being like lambasted on social media for speaking out against my tribe, as you're describing. Now, before we get to the courage piece, though, I think part of what stands in the way, what obstructs it, is that I think there's an implicit problem in mindfulness culture around the issue of non-judging. Because if you come out with any kind of statement that is a judgment against something in your tribe, then you're being a judgmental person and just evincing how badly or what a poor meditator or mindfulness person you are, if that's part of your brand, like mine. So I'm doubly hamstrung. There's an expectation that I won't have judgments because I'm a mindfulness practitioner.
At the same time, we referred to skillful. Was it action? Skillful means whatever.
Skillful speech.
And skillful intervention. It entails implicit judgments. It doesn't entail you saying to people, "You're right, you're wrong," but it could entail something like just saying, it seems to me that if we all put it this way, then, Trump supporters are going to take it that way. We don't, that's probably not constructive. And, that would be now implicit in that is a judgment, right? The judgment is like doing it the way we were doing it is suboptimal, not good, given our goals, right? Mm-hmm. But I think you'd agree that, putting it in there is, you take my point. You can, without violating any fundamental tenets of Buddhism, you can wade in and say the equivalent of, I think this is not a good idea. Right? That's what skillful action is.
Right. And I think you do that better than most because you go out of the way to have cognitive empathy for the opposing view. You're able to be a kind of diplomat between the two sides. That's not so easy. And I think even if you're a mindfulness practitioner, you could still be quite under the sway of your own internal bias system.
Sure, we all are. It's very hard. It's very, enlightenment would be to be completely free of the biases, I think, among other things. I don't know anybody who's enlightened. It's definitely not me. So and let's don't get into that argument either, okay? I know you have a more liberal threshold for enlightenment, I think, but
I see awakening as a process, and it can be endlessly refined, and to frame it as a thing that's out of reach. I think you're right. I don't see that as being helpful, but okay. So then the mindfulness to courage connection. One way of describing that is that, and I want to see if you agree with it, is that mindfulness, in the course of doing it, you learn to tolerate things you don't normally sit with. And this gets back to your practice. Mm-hmm. Like, can you sit with not being focused? Can you bring tolerance to that? Which I see as tolerance as the seed of compassion. The more you can tolerate something that's uncomfortable, you can start to see into the mechanism of it more. Mm-hmm. So it's the seedling. I can think of a few cases where I have confronted fears. I mean, even talking to you is me confronting a fear. Coming onto a platform like this with you is like takes me way outside my own comfort zone. But I think it's a result of actually just being okay with not sounding so clear or feeling so good or feeling like it wasn't the greatest.
But you're the guru. I'm the student. You should, how nervous should I be?
Don't.
I'm suddenly terrified.
No, the only reason, don't be terrified, because I'm not a guru, and you know that. The phrase I like is Kalyana Mitra, the spiritual friend. You and I have with others a spiritual friendship, in the sense that we have engaged with practice together. We share some interest in the practice, and we enjoy talking about it. But the ability to tolerate things outside of your thermostatic comfort zone does breed a kind of courage if you're willing to go.
Okay, but wait, let's make sure we have the application right here. I shouldn't have distracted us by calling you a guru. Are you saying that tolerance? Are you talking about tolerance of what kinds of things are you talking about? Tolerance of? There's tolerance of the things you see online that you want to, in effect, criticize. There's that kind of tolerance, by which we mean not that you're not going to point out what might be suboptimal about them, not tolerance in that sense, but in the sense that you don't freak out when you see them. It's like, okay, that's happening.
No, I'm talking about the tolerance of the consequence of speaking out.
Okay. That's hard.
I'm talking about the tolerance of that's what the fear is confronting.
Say Right. That's harder. And one thing about it is, like, it seems to me like, let's suppose that you're going to say this thing on Twitter, and you sit down, you meditate, maybe you imagine the kind of blowback, to the extent that you can, people saying mean things about you on Twitter, and you reach a kind of peace with your imagined version of it. It's not triggering you as much. It's not feeling so aversive. You're just kind of observing it. And then you go on Twitter and you say the thing, and then the people call you a neofascist, and then you're like, "Fuck, that hurt." And then doesn't that kind of defeat the whole purpose? I mean, in other words, you know what I mean? I mean, then you've gotten, to the extent that it hurts, it is going to be that much harder, right? The next time you tell me.
I mean, I'm off the platform mostly, so I'm maybe you're not. No, this is where I'm the tables. You're the guru to me. How do I become more courageous? Because the thought I had the other day, I'm going to go on a tangent for a second, if you'll indulge me, is that my life partner and I had one of our perennial problems. It's a miscommunication problem. And these happen like once a month or so, and they can get really escalated really quickly. Now, I don't need to go into specifics.
Good idea.
After really spending some time talking to her about it in a calmer space, what I realized was that under normal circumstances, we're in harmony. We're coming back to this musical level. We're in harmony. And then something happens and one of us goes out of key. and invariably,
and you may have different ideas about who that person was, even.
Exactly, you're right on. But it doesn't matter who it is out of key, because the resultant discord is so bad that whatever statement gets made in the out of key disharmony, whatever statement is there, it gets interpreted as a hand grenade getting launched, and it really will escalate into this existential threat, which I think is more or less what we see on the national scale right now. Two warring tribes hurling grenades, both sides feeling that it's an existential threat. Now, in couples therapy, what they talk about is this practice of mirror listening. One person speaks and speaks for maybe 5 minutes, and after they speak, the other person, the other partner, needs to mirror back and sort of steelman what the person said, what she said or he said. And you don't progress until the first speaker feels like they've been heard and have been more or less understood. Now, this is what I'm getting at. It's like, this is the kind of process that I think you might want to be thinking about on a broader scale, because it's not just about it's the conversation that needs to shift and by both parties figuring an off-ramp from the conflict to get into being in tune again. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, but are you talking about like in the interaction between America's two big tribes, red and blue, or
yeah,
I don't see an easy way for me to orchestrate that. I see here part of the problem. I mean, it's hard to influence the other tribe. If you're going to have any impact, it's probably going to be preaching to your own tribe. And even that's hard because things are so polarized. So if you start saying anything that sounds like, oh, you're trying to excuse what they do, you're trying to understand them, what they're doing is intolerable. We shouldn't try to understand them. We shouldn't try to, if you try to say things in a way that won't offend them, you're surrendering to them and blah, blah, blah. It's hard enough to preach to your own tribe in times like this, but it's super hard to preach to the other tribe, right?
Except the intuition you expressed in that courage piece, which is that you suspect there are more people like you, and I think you're right.
Oh yeah. Well, I think there are more people like me in my tribe. I mean, this was a specific issue. In general, like there are lots of things politically that in my tribe there are things that, if you say them, I tend to get a lot of receptivity. Like, don't you think maybe in this particular case the identity politics went too far? And a lot of people say yes, but they're not saying it online. Or like, don't you think police aren't always evil? And they go, yeah, they're not always bad. And you're like, but would you say that online? Like, even as modest a claim like that. So that's what I meant is like, there are some ideas that I think are pretty widespread within my tribe that people are very reluctant to express. Absolutely.
Right. So I don't know how we set that up to improve conversation.
Well, it's like a critical mass thing, though. I mean, that particular thing, when there's a lot of people who are afraid to say something, it's like, eventually there's a snowflake that causes the avalanche. Eventually, if enough people step forward, you can reach a tipping point where people feel comfortable. And by the way, this is what happened with Trump, I think, is like there were a lot of people in his what is now his tribe who wanted to say these things. And we might not approve of all of them or any of them, but they believed them. And they wanted to say these things about political correctness. They wanted you to quit lecturing them about how you could and couldn't describe some minority group. There were all these things, and they really weren't. They weren't seeing them on TV, right? So they could tell, like, this is not acceptable. You don't see this on TV. Suddenly this guy shows up. He's on TV. He's saying them. And that was for them the snowflake that caused the avalanche, I think. And suddenly that's why people rallied around such an imperfect figure. A lot of them recognize his imperfections. But it's like, he's all we got. That's kind of a digression, but that's what within your own tribe, the reason, I guess part of the case for courage is that, like, if a few more people can show it, right, you might reach that tipping point where something that needs to be said within your tribe is now widely said.
Right. The thought that occurred to me is that you've used this phrase in the past that what's good for the individual is good for the collective. So mindfulness on one level can be thought of, a mindfulness practice can be thought of as self-help. But if more people do it, even with that intention of just sort of getting a little more relaxed, a little more peaceful, whatever, then that could have a positive outcome distributed through the collective. I'm trying to imagine, like, my recent experience with this conflagration at home made me realize that I did not get good training growing up on how to be a good communicator, and I don't think I'm the only one. And it's actually a specific skill line that, like ear training, like mindfulness, and they're all reinforced. They could all reinforce each other, but needs its own kind of practice and development, like in an ongoing way. If you're really serious about becoming a more cognitively empathic interlocutor.
Yeah, where cognitive empathy means kind of just understanding the point of view of the other person.
Right. Like that, I mean, that it almost like that needs to be a practice, which I put in your eightfold Dharma path that you're developing in the Apocalypse Aversion project.
I was glad to hear that I'm developing this. Until we spoke shortly before I clicked record today, I didn't realize I was.
Well, think about it. What's the first noble truth in Buddhism?
Well,
I don't mean to put you on the spot.
About suffer, yeah, but no, it's translated as misleadingly, I think, as life is suffering. But I'm not. I'm the one who's supposed to not care about translation, so never mind.
Right. Let me just. Okay. So
and then there is the source of suffering. Ultimately, is the craving, and there's a way to get rid of the craving. Yeah.
So it follows an Ayurvedic, ancient Indian medical prescription or formulation. There's symptoms. There's a symptom of dukkha. There's
dukkha is what's often translated as suffering, perhaps.
Suffering, right? Suffering or just chronic frustration, as I think Alan Watts put it. Then there's the cause, the diagnosis. What's at the root of it? Tana or grasping. And there's various forms of grasping. But then the third truth is, or the third ennobling truth, I like that translation, is the realization of the liberation from the cause. Whether that's a once and for all thing, I don't think that's the case. It's more of a momentary thing where you learn a new dimension of a new way of being independent of the conditioning that had you grasping.
Mm-hmm. And that leads to the eightfold.
Well, the eightfold path is a prescription.
Right.
It's sort of the medicine that you have to develop to facilitate a deepening understanding of those other three truths. So in your Apocalypse Aversion project, you want to map what you're doing into that schemata? I did it last night. It kept me up till 2:00.
You start with it's like a societal level diagnosis along those lines, you mean?
Yeah. I think I wrote
yeah,
zero-sum tribalism will more or less guarantee an inability to handle the apocalypse. It's an existential level issue.
Yeah. I mean, I did. So you had read my most recent one where I had the seven tenet breakdown.
Yep. That brought it into clarity. That's your analysis of the symptom and part of the cause, the diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
So the diagnosis is what?
Well, the psychology of tribalism, I'm saying, is at the root of it.
Well, that's the symptom, I think. The root of it is cognitive bias and cognitive biases.
Yeah, I mean, you can. I mean, the way I put it is that the psychology of tribalism consists of cognitive biases, you can say, for the most part. But I mean, it seems to me the symptom is not so much the psychology of tribalism as the strife, the conflict, that's kind of analogous. That's what signals that there's a problem, and it leads. It is almost synonymous with suffering. It's like it's not fun for most people. It causes pain. It's bad. It's a symptom. I'd say the source of it is. I'd say what's analogous to the Tanha part is of the Noble Truths is could either be put as the psychology of tribalism or in terms of its constituent parts, which includes these cognitive biases. That's the way I would think of it. And then the prescription is the third part is.
No, that's not the prescription. That's the prognosis.
Right, that's the prognosis. I was going to say the prescription is harder, but I hinted at that. It includes mindfulness.
Right. Mindfulness would be one piece, I think, but go back to the prognosis. How would you define the prognosis?
Well, I mean, if you take prognosis to mean
if you follow the prescription, if you're able to follow the prescription,
yeah. What is the good outcome?
Right.
The good outcome is a true global community at a nuts and bolt level, characterized by some degree of international governance, but not massive strife along national, ethnic, religious, or ideological lines.
Right. So, are you comfortable with the phrase non-zero consciousness? Or what do you think of that? That's the phrase. It's like,
yeah,
because that's what the prescription needs to do. If you've been talking about the need for an evolution or development and transformation in human psychology, it would imply, I think, moving from the kinds of things that get one into a zero-sum frame of consciousness to ability to operate at non-zero sum.
Yeah, I mean, the only reason I'd hesitate, there is an insufficient awareness of non-zero sum dynamics, which makes it hard to respond wisely to them. I think all that's really required for the salvation of the world is for everyone to recognize non-zero sum dynamics when they exist and respond wisely to them, even from the point of view of self-interest. I mean, that's not all you need if you want, like, for justice to prevail and everything. But if job one is to keep the planet intact and get us all on the same page so we can talk about all of these things, including justice, then it really would be enough for people to recognize non-zero sum dynamics, react to them wisely, even from the point of view of self-interest or national self-interest, because, well, I could explain why I think that is strictly speaking enough if you just want to keep the planet intact. But if I hesitate over a phrase like non-zero consciousness, it's because zero-sum dynamics do exist in the world. Mm-hmm. And it's like in all kinds of realms, in athletic realms, they're real, and you might as well recognize them when they exist. I sometimes get people like reacting to my writing by saying, oh, they don't realize that this is a non-zero sum situation. Sometimes I think, no, actually, that's not a non-zero sum. You guys have a natural conflict of interest. That happens in life. You want different things, and that are incompatible. But yeah, no, a non-zero consciousness does capture a lot of, with that kind of qualification.
So I'm going to try to thread this back to the very beginning. You and I, we haven't mentioned this conversation, but you and I are one of the things that kicked off the series of conversations was the tragic and untimely death of our mutual friend Michael Brooks. Mm-hmm. Years before Michael Brooks became the celebrated progressive pundit that he was, he and I were interested in launching a mindfulness consultancy that would help individuals within organizations overcome cognitive biases through mindfulness training. So it was a combination of cognitive bias training and mindfulness training synthesized with that explicit intention. Mm-hmm. And we never got it off the ground, but we did offer some sort of a few series of workshops to a small number of people that I had through my own network of students. And one of the things we were exploring was approaching meditation practice as a way of developing non-zero sum relationship to your own mind. And this is what I think is like if we can frame and this is how I'm trying to frame mindfulness practice, rather than having this divided mind between good experience and bad experience, these two binary oppositions, to actually get the parts, anything that happens, to be held and received and tolerated enough to see the larger process under play. That it doesn't need to be a war, which is often what happens in people's psychology. They get divided between competing virtues and drive, different drives.
So you're saying a non-zero-sum relationship to your own mind. I mean, I'm tempted to ask whether you mean a non-zero-sum relationship, well, between two different parts of your mind, or between you and a given part of your mind, or something, right? Because, I mean, you become, I think, more aware through meditation, and you can, that there are, in a sense, these competing actors, competing impulses in your mind, and that's consistent with a certain scientific, paradigm about the structure of the mind. But that's not what you mean? There's a reason you're saying non-zero-sum relationship with your own mind?
Just a collaborative approach that doesn't try to, a zero-sum relationship would be like you have to get rid of things. This is like they get to cut things out. You can't have one thing without the other. Mm-hmm. And from the perspective of non-duality, we're waking up to a capacity to hold the totality of our being from a different perspective, mm-hmm. or from a different dimension of ourselves. Namely, awareness wakes up to being able to hold the totality of good and evil within the heart.
So, I mean, if you had a non-zero-sum relationship with your mind, you would, at a minimum, spend less time saying, "Bob, you fucked up again."
At minimum.
But the question arises: is that because you would? Is that just because you would fuck up less, or is it because saying that, even when it's arguably true, is being zero sum in your view, or something?
I think it's resisting it, trying to squash it as zero sum. Whatever energy comes up, whatever manifestation of the hindrance, whatever manifestation of tanha, if you can collaborate it and actually enlist it in the project of developing more wisdom and compassion, to me that seems like a move, like it's a win-win, because you're collaborating with the energy rather than resisting and fighting it. Okay.
Well, so that would be part of what you mean by non-zero consciousness?
Yeah, I may not be using the term correctly. I realize that.
It is. I don't think it's that. I think it's more like my conceptualizing my mind in a way that allows me to even apply that kind of terminology to it. So that's what I'll have to think about.
I just think of like when the times when you've like there's a shared there's an outcome that's dependent on two parties collaborating and working together. Whether it's a hunt, two hunters have to work in a non-zero sum dynamic to take down the beast. So if the aim is to become more tolerant, compassionate, and wise about your experience, you will see in the course of your meditation that you have parts of you that are in competition around that process. Right. They will struggle with it, and so it's when you learning to essentially get all parts of yourself to function like a harmonized team.
Yeah, but see, that's exactly my point. That the way you put it there, if you get the parts of yourself to function harmoniously, then you could say they are in non-zero sum relationship with each other. I mean, first you have to characterize them as these discrete things that are capable of having outcomes that are good or bad from their point of view. But anyway, that's kind of what I had in mind, is the way you put it, is like bringing all of the parts of you into harmony in pursuit of a goal, is, and arguably in a certain sense, to, It isn't strictly speaking to bring them into the non-zero sum relationship. It's to bring them to the kind of win-win outcome of what was intrinsically a non-zero sum relationship. That's a way I could see. That's why I was drawn to that way of thinking about it, right? Almost dividing your mind into parts that you want to be working harmoniously.
And I think that's the phenomenological experience when you look into yourself. You start to see that you have different, and we speak about it colloquially, a part of me wanted to do that, a part of me wanted, and there's a whole psychodynamic system called internal family systems that sort of has a conscious way of engaging and communicating and conversing with these parts to, in a sense, get them to work together as a team, or you the core self, or the conductor with the whole orchestra, getting the orchestra in tune.
Yeah, and there's just the modular view of the mind, certain versions of which are kind of that, these actors, and anyway, I have a lot to think about. We're approaching the 90-minute mark. One
thing I want you to think about. Here's your homework.
Oblige.
Prescription. The fourth. Aspect of the.
We haven't gotten to. I mean, we should save this because it sounds like a big subject, but we haven't gotten to my whole eightfold thing, which you say I have or should have.
I think you're in the process of developing it.
Well, the last newsletter had 7. I just need one more. No, I know those don't map onto an eightfold path. I realize those were.
No, they do. They listen, but they do. What you're mostly describing are wise view. Like how to comprehend the dynamics of the world in terms of non-zero, to see the non-zero sum dynamics that are at play. That's like the philosophical, cognitive aspect of the eightfold path as it's being updated right now. And then the intentions that flow from that. And then you can get into action, speech, livelihood, energy, mindfulness, and samadhi, which we'll talk about another time.
Okay, this is I think this has a lot of potential. I'm glad you reacted to that, the little 7-tenet thing I laid out by thinking it could be further developed, somewhat along the same lines. In other words, I had more than one reaction like that. Oh, okay, this is what you've been saying is a little clearer to me now.
And I also think, and I know, you mentioned, you wrote about the story of Frankenstein. We don't have to get into that now, but I hear you looking for stories that are kind of on the mythic level that convey the deep structure of the worldview you're trying to share.
Yeah, and this allows us to actually close with a reference to your work. So in your Everyday Sublime podcast, you did this podcast. I wasn't aware of this story from the Buddhist text. I assume this is in the Mahayana.
No, this is Theravada.
Really, in the Theravada canon. Okay, so it's this. This guy's name is translated as what? Guy who cuts off fingers or something? What was it? It was like this guy. Anyway, what it has in common with the Frankenstein story is that it's a guy who kind of becomes this horrible person for a while. Frankenstein becomes this horrible beastly monster, and yet started out, as this guy you'd like, and
innocent as the driven snow.
Yeah, and then was steered through kind of hostile social forces, into a dark place. And in this case, unlike in Frankenstein, there's redemption at the end because this guy has the good fortune to run into the Buddha himself. That was a lucky break. And he gets straightened out. But anyway, people should, if they want to hear the rest, what's the name of that episode on your podcast? Do you remember? The podcast is The Everyday Sublime.
Everyday Sublime, the podcast. The name of that episode was Angulimala's Karma. Okay.
So you'll see how, if your problem is you're going around killing people and cutting off one of their fingers as a...
And then wearing it as a garland around stringing on a garland around your neck, then that's the story for you.
This is the podcast for you because there is a way out. You don't have to do this for the rest of your life.
And this gets back to our first retreat. I remember, you were driving off after your first retreat and you asked me, is this feeling I have now going to last? And my answer was, nope, I'm still an asshole, Bob.
Is that what you said?
I said, I'm still, yeah.
I think you're being too hard on yourself. I think you should apply more loving kindness to yourself.
That's idiot compassion.
Oh, okay, then don't. Don't. Whatever you do.
No. Real compassion is not going to tolerate the asshole.
Okay.
Well, I will tolerate it, but I will have commitment to transform it to good energy. Which is what I try to do.
You kind of look at it with bemused detachment and forgiveness, and yet aspire to change it.
Right.
See, that's what I think. You should look at yourself the way a loving God would look at you, right? Shakes its head, kind of doesn't approve, knows when you did something you shouldn't, and yet, because by virtue of omniscience, by virtue of understanding everything about how you came to be what you are, kind of understands. And so isn't too harsh. That's what I recommend.
Okay, I'll take that. I'm gonna imagine a loving, benevolent God shining down upon me next transgression.
I want to talk about this. We should talk about this in the future because that's a particular little shtick of mine that actually, even if you don't believe in God, there's a sense in which you can say God loves you and forgives you and it can help. That's the cryptic thing I leave you with.
There's so much to, well, this is what I think a lot of your work does, is it zooms out to this 10,000 foot view to see the various causes and conditions that cause people to be the way they are. Through natural selection and evolutionary pressures and technological pressures, it really does change the sense what I have around my personal authorship on these things. I mean, when I act like that, it's causes and conditions that have been baked into me that are just getting expressed.
Yeah, causes and conditions being a Buddhist kind of phrase. That's the great thing about Buddhism. I mean, it understands the pervasiveness of causality. and that's the irony. People think of it as this fuzzy Eastern thing. In a certain sense, it's very infused by the scientific spirit. It takes causality seriously as a pervasive thing, right? And it wants you to understand that your own behavior and psychological stuff is a result of causal forces, and it wants you to become aware of those, and that's the path to liberation.
And you have to be aware of them because the access to them is what comes up from the unconscious when your mind wanders.
We have come full circle.
I told you we would.
Okay, so I'm going to try following your sage guru advice when I meditate tomorrow. Oh! This occurred to me while we were talking. Here's what on the courage thing. This just occurred to me is yeah, sit down and meditate before you tweet the thing that's going to get blowback. But then when you get the blowback, maybe you should sit down then on the cushion and observe the feeling you're having right then. That's what I think I should try. The very uncomfortable feeling.
Yeah, I mean, and sure, and that you can definitely do that.
You sound not optimistic about it working. I think it could be the ticket. It's so often the hard part is getting yourself to sit down.
I think you're, I guess the skepticism I have is I think you're trying to apply it in the moment. And this is what I'm trying to say. I think the habits of practice build up certain certain character traits that over time.
Absolutely true.
Right? Yeah.
So that if you got a really robust practice, then anything you feel out there in the world, you'll be better at stepping back and observing before it grabs a hold of you and compels you to do something that's not wise. That's all true. At the same time, this feeling, you'd agree probably it's good to practice with all, kinds of feelings, right? And this is a specific kind of pain that's not that easy to imagine. And it's probably not going to afflict you while you're doing your morning sitting. So, you might want to take that opportunity, and it's probably the best way to defuse it. What I recommend is okay, so you tweet the thing, 3 assholes call you a neofascist. We don't really consider them assholes. We're very tolerant. But, okay, so you see it, and then you mute them, so you're not going to hear any more. You got it. And then you sit down and you observe the feeling that you're having, which is an uncomfortable feeling.
So are you going to do that between now and next time we meet?
Assuming I work up the courage to tweet something unpopular, which probably won't happen. We'll see. We'll see, but I will try to do the 4 R's. That I guarantee you, if I can remember them. I
wish you luck. I wish you luck with that.
So thank you. So we will return to this whole thing in all its dimensions, and I will. I'll try to summon Nonzero consciousness, and
non-zero. I mean, I was also banning the phrase non-zero communication.
You could go all out. Somebody wants. Anyway, you could.
I can see you moderating debates, similar, with people from other sides.
Yeah.
And shaping it around a goodwill effort to heal this problem. Like you're like a marital therapist for the country.
That's okay. There it is. I'm going to go change my LinkedIn profile. Thank you for that phrase.
You know what I mean, though.
Yeah, no, that's it. That's my calling. That's my calling.
Well,
okay.
I think your calling is you're trying to do it for the world.
You're right. Country wasn't big enough. I'm the marital therapist
for the world.
Whole darn world.
It's a big burden.
But somebody's got to do this job, and why not? Why not me? Well, okay. Because I can't even meditate. That's why, Bob. Because you can't even meditate. But now I got the 4 R's, so I'm going to get better. I know I shouldn't think of it that way. I know, but I will. And on
the last thing is the retreat with Michael and Narayan.
Yeah.
I was on a retreat with Michael once where someone complained that their meditation was no good. They weren't making any progress. They couldn't, as you kind of complained about not being able to stay on the breath and this. And then Michael's answer to the share was, "Well, tell me about your life. How are your relationships?" And the guy said, "Oh, my children are doing well. Very, very fulfilled in my career, my marriage, and life's pretty good. I just can't focus on my breath."
He's like, well,
Michael's answer was, "Sounds like you have a good practice."
I would have said, "Why are you even trying to focus on your breath? Enjoy your life, man." Okay, so anyway, we should go. We'll be back at some point, and thank you for the sage guidance, Josh.
Thank you, Bob. I look forward to hearing the report.
I promise to deliver it. We'll see you.